Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, I hope that people online can hear. I think people out enough for everybody here. Anyway, good evening. Thanks for coming to our first 2024 program in Committee 100. This is a very interesting topic, as you all know. In fact, many of you in this room and online took a survey for us last fall, and this was the #1 topic that everybody wanted to hear about. So we immediately jumped on it and put this program together over Christmas. But we really had a good time throwing it together for you guys. Also, you also said to us in the survey, I wanted to bring this up because it was very helpful for us to hear it, that you prefer, it's only a 50-50 split between those who want to be in person and those who want to be virtual. And if there's any indication of that, we have about 140 people online, and we have about, I'd say about 60 people in the room. So that's one of the highest numbers we've ever had for any program. A big thank you to the committee board members, Devalchi, Cal, and John Bystaff for the work that they did on pulling this program together. They're also our program chairs this year. And also thanks to Karen Bate, Brian Coleman, Hannah Danenfelser, Dan Dixon, Liz Nora, and Tony Weaver, who also put a lot of work into putting this program together for you tonight. I don't see any elected officials in the room, but I think Susan Cunningham, our newly elected, one of our newly elected county board members, is on virtual. So before we start, as usual, we got to do this brief appeal. We really need your donations. That's what we survive on. We're not member oriented right now. So please remember that. And if by donating to us, you are immediately made a member of Committee 100, and your partner is also considered a member under the same donation. So please donate often and largely. Yeah.
Are there QR codes floating around the room that will take you to a donation list?
Very good. And if you got your credit card with you, that's perfect. Thank you, Tony. And this is one of the reasons that the Committee 100, for the first time, and probably, and Nita Noah would know this, that we're looking to hire an administrator, a part-time administrator, in support of the Committee 100. The move to the 21st century and being in person and being virtual and all the technology, the innovation that involves, really requires us to do that as us volunteers are going to be able to do the programs that you want to see. One of the cornerstones, so anyway, the information will be on it's not on here now, but there is a slide that has the link and how you can get on there to donate, to volunteer, and also look at the hiring link and look at what we're looking to hire. If you know anybody, please let me know. So on to the panel, what you came here for. During the Q&A for those virtual participants who submitted as they were logging on and submitting their desire to be here, during our, let me start this over. I'm looking at it, what am I saying here? During the QA for those virtual participants, submit your questions to our panelists or a specific speaker at any time during the program using the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. And I think it's up here somewhere, but hopefully some of you already know that technology. As we prepared tonight's program, we were intentional about providing relevant information on current events related to expanded housing options in Arlington. What this effectively means is that we are focusing on the pending litigation challenging the county's board approval of the EHO framework from March 2023. As you formulate your questions this evening, kindly remember that tonight's program is not a forum to reconsider the EHO existing framework. Rather, our focus tonight is to better understand the current litigation challenging the county's approval of the EHO framework and the potential what-ifs that could happen when either side prevails. So on that note, I think we must be having some problems with our slides, but we can now go on to the speakers' slides. It is my pleasure to introduce our 4 speakers who will speak in the order that they appear on the screen or in the order that I'm introducing them. Rainey Delaney.
I usually go by Rennie.
Rennie, I knew I was gonna mess that up. Rennie and Tad Longer will be presenting together on the positions of the litigants. They will help us understand the theory of the case and challenges presented by the plaintiffs or the group of homeowners who filed the complaint and the county's position defending against those claims. Rennie will focus on the defendant's side and Tad will focus on the plaintiff's side. John Ware and Michelle Winters will provide insight on the potential outcomes of a final court decision. John will share his thoughts if the county is victorious, and Michelle will help us understand what we can expect if the homeowners prevail. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. And by the way, Tony Weaver is going to give you kind of a yell at you within after 5 minutes and letting you know that you only have 2 minutes left.
The timer will loudly announce.
Okay.
It will be very uncomfortable if you keep speaking.
So on that note, I'm going to this over to you. And then you can just close it down.
Good evening, everyone. So what Tad and I have decided to do is I was going to tee up each of the 7 counts in the lawsuit, give you a little bit of information about each, and then Tad would give you some, color commentary from his perspective, and then I would clean up any things that I thought were needed to be said. So let me first say that I usually have a great deal more certainty about my views on legal matters, but usually I'm being paid by someone to have. I found it was very difficult in looking at this complaint to come to a definitive, answer about any of the issues, but we can certainly tee those issues up for you. And then as Tad and I discuss them, I think you're going to know a whole lot more about this suit, and you'll find that there are some interesting things that are going on here. First, in terms of the general. The trial is set for, I believe, July 8th for 5 days. You should know that the plaintiff's lawyer in this case is very experienced. I believe he was a deputy county attorney for Prince William County for 20-some years. And for the last 10 or so, he's focused on plaintiff's side zoning issues. So you have a very experienced lawyer who has gone through the Virginia zoning code and found every possible issue that one could find. So let's get to count 1. So there's 7 counts in the complaint. I'll give you the slide and then Tad will give you sort of his take on it. So count 1, failure to properly initiate a resolution or motion for a zoning amendment. And so if you look at Virginia Code 15.2-2286A7, it says that zoning amendments may be initiated by the following procedure, one of which is resolution of the governing body or motion of the planning commission. So if you look at Exhibit A to the complaint, what you see is that the board did not initiate a zoning discussion in the manner that you might think is contemplated by the statute. Instead, they passed a motion to advertise the public hearing of the zoning amendments. And so Giff Hampshire's point is advertising is done separately under Virginia Code 15.2-2204. That's a distinct process, and therefore the initiation is illegal. And why does it matter? If you remember the Renke case in 2008, there was an eligibility requirement in the statute that was not met, and the Supreme Court looked at the zoning ordinance. So he's got something here to think about.
To put a finer point on it, and to sort of give you a distinguishment between our points of view, Rennie is a very good litigator. He focuses his time in trial in courts. I'm a land use attorney. I practice, process cases through local jurisdictions, primarily here in Arlington. My land use practice is primarily here in Arlington. And so we work with these ordinances, these specific sections of the code all the time. So the subject matter where I practice on a daily basis. And what Rennie was saying is, in our business, we have to be very careful because we're dealing with a legislative process when we try land use cases, as opposed to a judicial process. And the legislative processes require different kinds of advertising, different kinds of noticing, and different kinds of procedures based on how you characterize those habits.
Pat, can you put that a little closer to your mouth?
Sure, based on how you characterize those acts. And what Gibb is doing here, the plaintiff's counsel is doing here, is he said, you know, the 2204, section 15 to 2204 governs how you advertise for public hearings. But if you're going to make a zoning map amendment and kick off a major zoning legislative process, that requires a special starting gun. And that starting gun we find in 2286, which requires them to pass a resolution to formally notify everybody in the county or in that locality that this type of process, this special kind of legislative process has officially begun. We're not talking about it anymore. We're in doing process. And what he's saying is, well, the county, he's brought in the question of whether or not that procedure was followed correctly. And that's simply going to be a question of a subjective fact interpretation by the judge at the time when he goes through the record.
Yeah, from my perspective, the first thing that jumps out on this count is when you look at the statute, it uses the word may instead of shall with respect to the initiation process. Now, generally, the law shall is mandatory and may is permissive. But in some cases, the courts will say, well, may is basically mandatory and that you may do it or you may not do it. So that comes to the question of how is Judge Shell, who's the specific judge assigned to the case, going to look at it. And I think the conclusion that you could reach is, you know, they probably stated enough to get the trial, and then we'll see how they all want to interpret it. But whatever Judge Shell thinks, we're talking about a question of law. So he'll give his opinion, the Court of Appeals could give its opinion, and the Supreme Court could give its opinion. And I'm uncertain as to, you know, how all of those different bodies will wrestle with the specific question. So the next one is failure to advertise per Virginia law. So before the county board takes action, it has to advertise as set forth under 15.2-2204A. That's a requirement. There is a new statute now. The EHO was passed under the former statute, which required the advertisement to contain a descriptive summary of the proposed action. And I'm sure if Gift was here, he would tell you that he doesn't think that the advertisement was descriptive of what the action was, given that it outlined a number of options, as opposed to stating the issue on the agenda is option one, or this is what we're going to do or not do. Instead, they gave several options. So if you're a citizen, you might say to yourself, well, I don't really know what they're going to do, so how are you giving me a descriptive summary of what they're going to do? And then so there's a standard, and then his other point is that if you are going to increase the density range, you have to specifically state that. So that's what Gift's saying in count 2.
Would you put it up close to you?
Right, so this is another procedural count, so I'm hoping we can go through these fairly quickly because there's some really good things in this case. But count 2 again goes to how well and how sufficiently the county board advertised for what was going to be heard. I'm sure a lot of you watched the hearings happen real time, and you were focusing on all the amended staff reports, all the different proposals that were coming out of staff that ran up right to the hearing, and there were literally dozens and dozens of options and scenarios. And I don't even think when the county board sat down to vote on it, they knew exactly what they were going to talk about that day. And so the question is that, you know, the notices that went out and the advertisements that went out sufficiently informed people what was actually going to be voted on and what was going to be discussed here. And, you know, what they were going to, you know, adopt legislatively that day. And again, that's going to be a subjective review of the record. It's a legislative record. It's there for everybody to watch. And different people are going to have different opinions on that.
Speak up, please.
Sure, thanks. Well, again, we're dealing with here a question of law. And so you have the advertisement, and you have, you know, what the county did, and you have the statute. So this count will depend upon, you know, the judge's view of what the statute says in terms of requiring notice and what the advertisement says, and whether it contains a descriptive summary. Now, how much certainty is required? That's not all that clear to me, because there is a case from the Virginia Supreme Court that doesn't require absolute certainty. So you're in this sort of wiggle area between, is it enough? Maybe, we'll see what the judge, what the Court of Appeals judges think, and what the Supreme Court justices think. So. All right, count 3. Failure to consider factors required of localities by the Code of Virginia. And so the comprehensive plan requires that ordinances be drawn with reasonable consideration for numerous factors. The complaint says that we did a FOIA request. We asked for all these studies. The county basically, and I don't know if this is true, but it's what's pled in the complaint. But the complaint pleads that the county did not actually conduct any studies, and that therefore that is a violation of the requirement to consider a lot of factors.
Okay, so as a land use practitioner, I love count 3. Because this is the meat and potatoes of this case. A lot of this stuff is procedural, it's technical. This is the real argument that's happening legally. And it requires, I think, some context on how localities work in Virginia. And I'm gonna borrow some of your time, ready, until you stop me. Every locality in Virginia is required to have a comprehensive plan. When the Commonwealth of Virginia issues a charter, the delegated authority to localities to regulate in those areas that they're delegated the authority to do so, they're required to follow certain provisions in the county in the state code. Every locality in Virginia is required by the state code to adopt and follow its own comprehensive plan. And the reason for having a comprehensive plan is so that localities don't get themselves into situations that they don't intend or foresee or plan for. Every comprehensive plan in Virginia is required to have a general land use plan. It's required to have a master transportation plan. It's required to have several elements. It's all the necessary building blocks to have a successful community. And in order for a locality to wield the legislative authority locally over land use matters, they need to follow the state code as it requires to how they organize their hearings and create and monitor these plans to ensure that the localities are successful. The interesting thing with zoning text amendments, this case is a zoning text amendment, arguably a zoning map amendment. It was amendment to the general land use plan. The facts of this case started out as a concept of creating new housing types along edges of urban corridors. And so this started out as a minor text amendment proposal. This was going to be, we're going to tweak this a little here, tweak this a little there. We're going to go along the edges of the urban corridors and figure out a better way to create different types of units for a more diverse way to create transitions between the high density cores of our corridors and the residential neighborhoods that border them. Somewhere in the deep, dark, dregs of COVID, that process morphed into, let's take a look at the whole county. And so what was a minor text amendment to the zoning ordinance became a major comprehensive zoning amendment proposal. And I think the interesting thing about this case is when we went from minor text amendment to major zoning amendment, but comprehensive zoning amendment, because again, this applied to 80% of the land area in the county, and it would increase that land area and density by a factor of 6. That's a substantial amount of increased residence density. Arlington's comprehensive plan has, I think, 11 elements. It's all the elements that govern our infrastructure: stormwater, transportation, sanitary sewer, drinking water, historic preservation, housing, parks and open space. You name it, we've got one in Arlington. We've got more elements than I think any other locality in Virginia in our comprehensive plan. The problem here is that the case went from a minor text amendment where, and the process the county took essentially was to take this to the ZOCO, zoning ordinance review committee, and they're trying. So I'll move along. I wish I had more time. But what GIP is saying is, and what the code requires is that if you make a major amendment to the comprehensive plan, you have to consider how the impacts, all the other elements of the of the comprehensive plan. So if you're gonna affect 80% of the county density wise and use wise, you need to consider its impacts on transportation, and consider its impacts on infrastructures, capacity, all the normal things that you would expect of a first world locality. The problem with the process that Giff has raised is he said, you have not considered any of these elements. And if you go back through the record, you know, if I filed for a new building in Boston, I would be in front of the Transportation Commission.
Okay,
I would be in front of the Planning Commission, the Housing Commission. None of this happened, and it's required by the code.
John, Tony, is that for the two of them, all the 14 minutes? 14 minutes.
Well, that's the end of the complaint.
Yeah.
4 more counts to go.
We'll give you about another 3 minutes if that's.
So I'll do the best I can, but, if you want to talk about the complaint, we have to sort of march through. Like that. So with count 3, it says reasonable consideration, that leaves a lot of leeway in my perspective. So kind of the county doesn't agree, I'm sure that it didn't conduct a reasonable consideration, because pages 9 and 10, I think, of their staff report said that they did the consideration that's required by statute. So they're not going to agree that they didn't do it. Now, I don't know what the county's evidence will be trial. I would assume someone's going to come in and testify to what consideration they gave. But I mean, it doesn't seem to me that if I call up Ted and I say, hey, what do you think about stormwater management? He says it's fine. I don't think that's probably enough reasonable consideration, but we'll see. Count 4, unlawful delegation of legislative authority. So this is a very interesting count. I didn't understand it the first 6 times that I read it. But basically they're saying is the county is allowed to do special exceptions by legislative action. And by delegating that authority to the county administrator, they're not allowed to do that. Arguably that violates some statutes. See what you think.
This is a count addressing the unlawful delegation of legislative authority to administrative officer. Giff is claiming that because the EHO stuff landed in Article 10 of our zoning ordinance, Article 10 is a bucket of a lot of random special exceptions. Special exceptions are legislatively granted amendments to the zoning ordinance. They're characterized as legislative acts. They are legislative acts. And our local legislature has no authority to delegate its legislative powers to an administrative officer. And so if these are in fact special exceptions, I think that's the question of the law here. Whether or not the EHO permit is a special exception is going to be a question for the judge.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Is it a special exception? Count 5, arbitrary. There's 5, 6, and 7. You want me to talk about?
You can do it quickly, yeah, to get to.
Well,
Lots of room for questions.
all right, count 5, is it arbitrary and capricious? This is usually the weakest count in any zoning suit, because the person has to show that the decision was unreasonable. If it does, then the county loses a presumption of unreasonableness. The court then must decide whether the decision is fairly debatable, but the complainant can still win if they basically show there's a failure to meet some procedural requirement. 6, failure to comply with the FOIA. It was dismissed, but it's subject to a motion reconsideration, which I believe will be heard tomorrow. If there is a FOIA violation, that is sometimes a headshot, as it was in the Berry case, which we cited. Then the landscaping provision, which basically means that the county was trying to do an end run around the Chesapeake Bay ordinance by exceeding the number of number of trees that the county can require. That the 2 ordinances had conflicting things. You want to add anything, Ted?
Yeah, I mean, arbitrary and capricious, it's the right standard for plan to chase in this case. Fairly debatable is a standard that is given to legislatures broad discretion on their legislative authority. You know, we're not talking about whether or not something is legal when you're talking about fairly debatable in the sense of it's not a yes or no question. You're talking about subjective legislative acts. And if the courts do not want to bind the legislature from having their discretion to act in their own discretion, as long as it's legal. The question that Giff has raised is in their exercise of their fairly debatable powers, which is a very low bar, whether or not they acted arbitrarily and capriciously in doing so. And that's really a question of, did they act in their own, did they make their own personal decisions? Or did they base their decisions on the factors that the state code required? And was that decision informed and evaluated vis-a-vis those requirements in 2286, the code? And again, that's part of the previous argument that was brought up. It's a very good argument. I think he's got the standards correctly, and we'll see what the judge has to say about that. As far as the landscaping provision, very interesting, kind of funny to watch. I don't think it's really material to the overall case. I think the judge can take this provision and annex it from the rest of their approval, their adoption, and so this can die on its own. It's found to be illegal. I don't think it will invalidate the whole legislative act, and I don't think it's immaterial whether or not this effort moves forward. Yeah.
All right, last issue is other defenses, and there are two that we can think of, one raised by the county, which is standing. The county says the people don't have the standing to bring the suit, which raises the question, well, if they don't have the standing to bring it, who does? Maybe nobody. And the other is we follow a county manager form of government. And so there are parts of the code that give county manager, the counties that are managed by a county manager, some additional rights. None of those have been identified as being a present in this case, but something to keep an eye out for. All right, that's the summary of the lawsuit.
Now we will turn to John Ware.
Great, thank you very much, committee and Jean for hosting this. I'm John Ware. I'm going to talk about what happens if the county wins. And sort of the best way to look at that is looking at the data, what's been happening so far in the last 6 months. Now, Tad and Randy were talking about how one of the counts was the county didn't do its homework. It was in the dark about what happened. Today, many neighbors and residents are in the dark about when and where these buildings might be going up or what they might look like. And last week at the county board's first meeting, the board members admitted they're in the dark about what's actually happening in the permits. So tonight, for the first time, you're going to see data even the board doesn't know about, because while the county has been giving EHO permits free to developers and charging neighbors fees to see what they look like, ASF, group I've been working with, has been paying the county the fees, getting the data, the permits from the county, working with economists, housing experts to process that data. Before I go into that, though, I want to start with a little context of what's been going on. So according to the county, quote, approximately 30% of Arlington's existing housing stock can be classified as missing middle housing. What does that look like over the last 50 years? The red line you see going up is the number of missing middle housing units. The blue line is single family homes. And the green line is the success we've had in transit-oriented development in large apartment buildings. The problem, of course, has been price. So the black line you see going up has been the high-end market rate housing. The county has increased that type of housing 47% since 2000. So think $500,000 for a 2-bedroom unit. To the point the county says we have a surplus of supply at that market and enough capacity going forward. The problem has been housing at the bottom end. So think about a $250,000 home for a family of 3. That's what led the county to do the missing middle study. According to its affordable housing plan, the goal was to provide rental opportunities for lower income households and to aid moderate income buyers while maintaining underlying zoning. Now, we're not here to debate what the county did. It did what it did, but as the old adage goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so projecting out what might happen in the future, I want to talk about what do we lose, what do we get, and in particular, the pace of space of what's happening and what will continue to happen, the size of what's happening, and money and affordability. So what you're seeing here is a single family home that will be torn down to be a 6-plex. I want to talk about median, the medians of the houses that are going to be torn down. So median is just if we get everybody here, terrific turnout, lined up from shortest to tallest, the median is the person right in the middle. So developers have been paying as a median amount $860,000 about to buy EHO property. Those have been assessed for $935,000, and the homes have been in the same family for about 30 years. 4 bedrooms, 1,900 square feet, 2 parking spots off street, and about a 30% tree canopy. Developers have been paying a range from as little as $475,000 to $1.6 million to buy homes and tear down to be EHO. Here's an example in South Arlington. It started a home in Douglas Park that was marketed for sale for about $500,000. A buyer came in $115,000 above asking price to buy it, to tear it down, to make EHOs. Side-by-side houses will likely sell for about $900,000 to $1 million. When we think about the pace of the space, and how many lots and where, the county paid $100,000 to a pair of non-economist consultants to project out the pace, and they said it would only be 19 to 21 lots per year dispersed throughout the county. The county then turned around and told other staff, this is the pace. Because it's so slow, we don't need to do the further deep analysis about what the impact might be. So what's reality? Instead of 19 to 21 per year, we see 50 applications in just the first 6 months. 26 of those have been approved. What you're looking at here is the heat map of where those applications are, courtesy of Michael O'Brady, an Arlingtonian PhD developmental economist sitting in the back, who's done a terrific job with the data. In terms of the EHO sites, they're far more localized than the county said. All but one of the applications have been in the R5 and R6 zones, the smaller zones. Number one site is Douglas Park with 5 applications, followed by Alcova Heights, Aurora Highlands, Bluemont, Lion Park, and North Highlands. When we think about what units and buildings are made or being approved, nearly 2/3 of the approved units are in sixplexes. It's the most common EHO building type, sixplex. You also see a number of 2 and 3 unit buildings because those can be subdivided, so you can own it without having condo fees. Talk about size. So the data is showing the buildings are bigger and on smaller lots than projected. The county said sixplexes would be more likely on the larger lots, but the opposite is true. You see a table here showing all the sixplex applications. Rather than at 12,000 square feet, you're seeing sixplexes approved at 6,000, 7,000 square feet. So roughly half the size the county was projecting. County had said these would be complementary and compatible with the scale and style of their intended neighborhoods. We're looking at here a single family attached home in Alcova Heights. County has approved, the builder approved 2 sixplexes side by side, tearing down all the trees you see here to create a total of 12 units, 24 bedrooms, 24 bathrooms, 12 parking space, and removal of 30+ trees. In terms of fit within the neighborhood, what you can expect, the county also said these would fit within the same footprint standards of existing homes. What does that look like in reality though? Here's a sixplex that's been approved for Aurora Highlands. We look at the median home in that part of the neighborhood. That's what it looks like by comparative size. We pulled the data going back 20 years. That's the median new home, the McMansions that people decry. And this is the largest new home in terms of above grade square footage put against the sixplex. Money and affordability. So here we're looking at the data on the unit sizes and bedroom counts. Approximately half of the approved units are 1 and 2 bedrooms. Prices are likely far higher than the same size units today. Here you see a $1.6 million missing middle building type recently went under sale on Edgewood Street, smaller than many of the 3 and 4 bedroom EHO types you see. So we're talking with realtors and work by Mr. O'Brady for the 3 and 4 bedroom units. Estimate of sale prices of $1 million to $1.6 million, and about $500,000 for 2 bedrooms. Land inflation. So the 2 examples you see here, developers bought these homes for more than 150% of the assessed value. The top is in John and Langston, the bottom is in Waycross. We're also seeing, like the earlier house I showed in Douglas Park, developers coming in $100,000 to $200,000 above asking, above where other bidders, single family home buyers are coming at. In terms of affordability, you're looking at here the smallest EHO unit, a 560 square foot, 1 bedroom in the basement. Projecting in the red bar here is the income you did afford to buy that. And that's graphed against the median Black household, median Hispanic household, median senior household here in Arlington. So there's a ton more data we've crunched. I'd love to share with you. Hopefully the county will be sharing some more data itself, which it hasn't done yet. And I will pass it to my neighbor just down the street, Michelle Winters.
Hello, everyone. John's right, we are neighbors. We live on the same street, right around the corner from Mr. Bystad, and we're all missing our civic association meeting tonight. To be here with you. John and I are actually on the board, and we have been for 15, 20 something years. Yeah, both former presidents of the Civic Association Board, as a matter of fact. So I am very glad to be here. Let me see if this works. Okay, so I'm gonna just get down to it. I'm guessing that many of you guys in the room here have not been in the market for a new home in quite a while. Am I right? Okay, so I thought it would help to show you a pretty representative sample of the newly built homes currently for sale in Arlington. I was inspired to do this by a text message I got from my husband a couple weeks ago, who happened to have been crawling through realtor.com and doing some research on some other thing. And he texted me and he said, geez, Arlington really needs missing middle. Now, he already knew that, but he had looked at the prices of what's going on in Arlington and it just drove it home for him again. So here are some anecdotes of that data. I don't know if you can see the numbers highlighted in red there. This sample of new build homes in Arlington range from about $1.8 million to $3.5 million. This is actually pretty representative of the sample, and I've got real data on the next slide to show you. By the way, these are from zip codes throughout the county. These are not just 22207. So this is what's happening everywhere. This is the alternative to EHO. These are what's replacing the small homes that are being bought and torn down. Okay, this is what happens if EHO doesn't exist, to be very clear. And if you want data, here's the data. Same research, I just pulled this off of Redfin yesterday, okay? This is organized by zip code in Arlington, by your pretty colors there, 22204 to 22207, and I put it in order by the most expensive home in each zip code. So this shows you the full picture, again, currently on the market, anything built 2022 and above, okay? They range from just under 1 million to above 4 million, $4.4 million. Again, when was the last time any of you guys tried to buy a house in Arlington? Can you afford 2 million, 2.5 million, 3 million, 3.5, $4.4 million? And at the time of this search, all of the newly built homes on this chart for sale in Arlington below $1.7 million were townhomes. So all the ones at the left side of the chart are townhomes, most of those in 22204. In 222, but if you exclude the townhomes from this, just the single family homes, which most of these are, in 22204, the average new single family home is average 1.7 million. In 22203, average is 2.1 million. In 22213 and 22201, the average is $2.8 million. So like I said before, these numbers are the ones that are the relevant market comparison for EHO housing. This is the only alternative that was legal before. And if EHO goes away, it's the only alternative that the people, the developers who are buying those houses will still be able to build all of these because that's what they've been doing for the past 10, 15 or more years. So the answer to the question of what will happen in 75% of our residential areas if the plaintiffs win is this. Okay. Now, to take that a little bit farther, a little bit more color commentary. So what does that mean? It means Arlington will continue on its path of supersized $1 million homes, that's clear. Smaller old homes will continue to be replaced. The same ones that John summarized that have been purchased, those will disappear and be replaced with those mega homes. Single family homes will continue to contribute to tree loss and impervious surface, which they have been up until now because no EHO has been built. Neighborhoods and schools will continue to be incredibly segregated. If you haven't seen the numbers, I'd be glad to show you. Middle income households will be unable to buy a home in the majority of Arlington. The 75% of the residential land that this ordinance applied to. That if the ordinance goes away, only single family homes will be allowed. Those will be inaccessible. Not to mention lower and modest income households, which have no options. I'm on the board of a community land trust. That community land trust is very excited to see this ordinance. And if the ordinance goes away, that CLT will not be able to do anything in Arlington. Renters and younger generations will struggle to remain. Businesses will continue to struggle hiring entry and mid-level positions. Climate change and impacts of sprawl will continue unabated because the greenest home is one that has existing infrastructure and a short commute. And aging safely will require either extreme assistance or relocation. However, next slide. The more likely outcome, in my view, thankfully, is that EHO is not going away in Arlington. Most of the plaintiff's arguments are procedural. Did you fall asleep in the first half of the presentation? Process, process, process. Did they use the word initiate? No, they didn't use the word initiate, but they followed the procedure that every single zoning ordinance and amendment that has been done in recent memory has followed. You know, a couple of the other things. Is it fairly debatable? Well, it's not only fairly debatable, it's hotly debated. Was the advertising sufficient? Well, as I believe all of the plaintiffs testified at the hearing. The advertisement was apparently effective because they read it and got there, and hundreds of other people did too, and they testified on all the details quite intelligently. I think that once we start building these homes and people see that the sky is not falling, that these homes can be built in a way that will benefit the whole community, that the current opposition will quiet down, at least somewhat. That's what we saw happen with accessory dwellings. It passed in 2008. I was the chair of the Housing Commission at the time. I was pregnant with my first child. I remember it. It was a similar fight, and by the time it came back for refinements, many of the opponents had flipped and were for it. They saw that Arlington was changing anyway, with higher prices, losing smaller homes and trees, and that the accessory dwellings didn't have anything to do with that, except to make the changes that we're seeing a little bit more inclusive. Thank you.
Okay, we're down to one microphone, so those who are talking from the audience, please use your stadium voice and give us your name. And online, make sure you put your name into the question that you want us to ask. We're going to try to be as fair as possible, but we're not taking any questions from virtual. They don't associate their name with it. So we're going to start. I'm just going to get people started here with a question that we came up with. What impact, if any, does Alexandria's approval of an EHO type program called Zoning for Housing, Housing for All, have on Arlington's litigation? And who wants to answer that first?
I'll take it. The answer is none.
None. Okay, is that it?
The answer is a lot, because if in some way, there's some procedural argument that wins and the county has to go back and do something and re-adopt something. First of all, it's very easy to cure procedural deficiencies. You change your process and you re-adopt it. It's exactly what Fairfax County did. Fairfax County's zoning ordinance was struck down a couple of years ago. And the opponents like to call attention to this. It was struck down, and within a couple of months, the county board of Fairfax County had re-adopted the same ordinance by fixing the procedural issues, and everything moved on as planned. So what we see in Alexandria that is relevant is the reflection of the shift that we're seeing in America, not only our region, but in America, that this type of change absolutely needs to happen. And no matter what you do to this particular ordinance, if this ordinance isn't in place, something like it will be in place to replace it along the lines of whether it's what Alexandria is doing or any other places.
Anybody else want to answer?
I think that what's happening in Arlington is meaningful, and, you know, Michelle's brought up some very good points about the procedural nature of the lawsuit. The interesting thing about the land use procedures that are required by the Code of Virginia is they're in place because they were, invariably, this is a political decision that the county board has the authority to make, and that the voters in Arlington can decide to remedy what the county board does with their votes. The code sees this as a very political situation. The reason for the code procedural requirements aren't to create arbitrary processes to do these things. The processes set forth in the code are to ensure that there is adequate public discourse on the impact of what is being proposed. In the case of a major zoning map amendment, the Code of Virginia requires us to study the transportation impacts affecting 80% of the county. It requires us to have a public discourse on the costs to the county residents of infrastructure and providing infrastructure for 80% of the county over the lifetime of the plan. These things weren't discussed at that level in Arlington, and I think what the takeaway for Alexandria should be is they should have a fully informed process that doesn't dodge those tough political questions in the process, so that the voters can hear what the impacts of what they're doing is going to be on the community. So the long-term fiscal planning can be done correctly, so long-term engineering plan can be done appropriately. And, you know, there's a cost to everything that we're talking about. And there is a need, obviously, for what you're advocating for. And there is a solution there somewhere, but the procedures are there for a reason.
If I could just add, I mean, obviously the lawsuits, the question was, what has happened in Alexandria relate to the lawsuit? In Arlington, the answer is none, but the question is, how does it relate politically? Then that opens up another whole can of worms. You know, one of the reasons that you file a lawsuit, you're not just thinking about the lawsuit itself, you're thinking about the political ramifications of it. If you win, do the people that want to propose it have the political wherewithal to do it again, go through the procedures the correct way? That is an entirely different calculus. And that's something that when you're filing a lawsuit, you think about, like, can I win something? And if I can, what will be the net effect? Because yes, procedural problems can be fixed, but they can also cause a host of other issues. And there's elections in between that may affect the outcome.
Anybody else want to comment?
Okay, I'm gonna take one now from online. So this is from Thomas Highwell. Will EHO really slow home price escalation, or will it do the opposite by accelerating tear down of existing affordable housing? Do you want to take that? Thank you.
So that question gets to, I think, one thing that was one of Michelle's central theses, that enacting EHO will stop the very expensive houses that are being built. One thing we looked at in looking at the data is tear downs. So the county has tear down data, single family homes through first 3 quarters last year. The number of single family homes torn down through the first 9 months of last year was exactly the same as the 10-year pace. So even though the county board approved EHO a year ago, and developers were buying these properties in the hopes they would become EHO throughout 2022 and 2023, you've seen absolutely no slowdown in the tear down of single family homes to become larger homes. Now, obviously, this is early in the process, that may change, But in terms of what we're seeing in the data, there's been no slowdown in the tear downs of homes to become single family homes.
So, that means that, gosh, what does that mean? That means that single-family homes, like the ones that I showed, can still be built. Nobody has lost the ability to build a single-family home. You can still do that. Anybody who owns a property, you can still build your single-family home. If you want to sell it to somebody who wants to build a single-family home, you can do that. Having EHO allows people to also do something else. It adds options. It doesn't take anything away from anybody.
Okay, I've got some questions up here, but let me open it up to the floor and see if anybody, okay, the woman there, make sure you give us your name. You right there. Yeah, yeah. You.
It was him.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
My name. I'm getting my little hairdo in the back. One thing I would like. What?
Your name.
Oh, Chris Walsh. Okay, one thing I just want to put to the group, after I finish with another point, which is quick. Can you guys explain the significance of the county changing by perhaps eventually on a factor of halfway, 50% of Arlington's formerly zoning situation, turning it into a multiplex and single family home situation? What are the permutations of that? Because I think everyone in this room lives in probably, and most of it, the majority live in single family homes. And that's why they came here. And that's why they paid the money. And sometimes they paid a lot of money to come here because of that. But could you just answer is there anything going on when the county fathers decide that, well, we're going to set in motion something where half of Arlington County is sixplexes and octoplexes and all that? Just, is that a thing? And then the other question for me is.
Just one.
One question.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. By the way, we've allowed an extension of about 15 minutes on this program if we're willing to stay behind. I think we've got a lot more questions than we initially anticipated. Who wants to take this question first?
So nod your head if I'm framing this correctly for you. Are you asking, is there anything in motion where the county is going to turn half of our existing?
Well, at 58 new buildings every year in
Right.
10 years, 580, that's quite a few buildings.
That's
And
correct.
so you go out from your home, which has a yard and has a, parking garage and everything, might end up next to, a sixplex. And how many cars will be along the street and that, you see what I mean? There's going to be crowding. And I don't know how you guys feel. I don't think Arlington is the best, a vast open area.
I'll answer
It's very crowded.
I'll answer that. And the answer is the county doesn't, because they didn't conduct those studies when they adopted this. So typically, like if I go in, for instance, a good example, and file for an application to build a 20-story building in Boston. Okay, we come in, we provide a transportation impact analysis. We're required to study all the civil engineering around the building. We upgrade the infrastructure for the county incrementally as we do these developments. And we provide affordable housing, we provide the space for the new and growing electrical equipment and expansion of the Dominion system. We provide the new water lines, we provide the new sanitary lines. We rebuild the streets, we rebuild the intersections. We do all of that incrementally with a special exception. EHO development is different because despite probably what Gift says in this, they're treating it as by right development, which means the builders can come in, they can clear a lot, build a new building, hook up to the existing infrastructure and leave. And that has long-term fiscal impacts for county infrastructure planning. If you take, for instance, just a hypothetical, you take a 20 house cul-de-sac off of Lee Road, and you multiply the number of buildings in that 20 house cul-de-sac to 60 dwelling, or to by a factor of 6 to 120 dwelling units. The question is that intersection that connects that cul-de-sac to Glebe Road going to function correctly or optimally? And then if you take every one of those subdivisions up and down Glebe Road and increase them by a factor of 6, is Glebe Road going to function adequately? We don't know. Those are studies that are typically done with major amendments. You know, if you're going to do a major project, think of the planning that went into the Amazon thing. Major impacts to Crystal City, years of planning, years of analysis, traffic counts, pedestrian counts. In the county knew every detail about it. That and level of analysis was not done when we looked at rezoning 80%.
I would also add to that, there's a speculative component in the sense that, you know, if you want to go to extremes, you know, you look at It's a Wonderful Life. You know, you're trying to build Pottersville, trying to, you know, keep Mayberry, whatever it is, exactly the way it is. I'm not sure that there really is those extremes, because developers are not going to build buildings that don't make sense for them, that people aren't going to want to buy, that people aren't going to want to live in. If they're 6 or 8 plexes, is somebody going to be buying them and renting them out to people? You know, what are those rents going to look like? What are the mortgages going to look like? So, you know, it's hard for me to even like look forward and say, is any of this actually going to make any of the housing cheaper? You know, I don't know, and I'm not sure the county knows. You know, Gift Hampshire's point would be, since you didn't do a study to show that there would be an impact on affordable housing in terms of affordability, then the county can't know that it's actually going to make homes cheaper either. So, you know, I think Tad and I are saying the same thing, which is, you know, we really don't know what the impact is going to be. I'm not sure anybody does.
Okay. Am I answering that question, or I'm? You'll pick up your car.
I'm gonna have to take one now from the virtuals, because this is from, Joshua Handler, and he was talking, I'm trying to paraphrase some of these things, but according to the county website, where the intent of missing the EHO is to get people in, like firefighters and teachers and such like that. Can these groups afford a $1.3 million EHO townhouse and or units in a 6-plex estimated by the county to cost nearly $700,000?
Can they afford the single family homes that will otherwise be there that are between 1.7 and 4.4 million?
And, you know, we always get a little chuckle about, we have a little chuckle about it in the land use and development community. Is, you know, we've been observing this, we've been sitting there with a bag of popcorn. This is a mess. And, you know, people talk about EHO units, missing middle units. And for those of us that produce units, really, we looked around at each other and we're like, well, what is a missing middle unit? Right? A missing middle unit, it's a townhouse. It's not a missing middle unit, it's a townhouse. It's maybe a condo unit. It's a multifamily residential unit. Maybe it's a duplex. The reality is that if you ask anybody that delivers this product to Arlingtonians, we know exactly what a townhouse is going to sell for in Arlington County. We know exactly what a condo unit is going to sell for based on its location. We know exactly what a multifamily unit is going to rent for. And, you know, nothing that we do is going to change that. You know, this plan does not affect the market in that regard. And we're not creating units that we've never created before. These units exist in other locations in the county. They just don't happen to exist in the R districts, which are now multifamily districts, low density multifamily districts. But, you know, all that pricing is null. It's known, it's knowable, it's not a mystery. If we want to know how much a townhouse is going to cost off of Langston Boulevard, we can run those comps and tell you exactly what it's going to cost. And if one of those built in 1986 is going for 1.1 million, A new one's not gonna be any cheaper.
Something that I think doesn't get enough, attention in this, when people start saying, well, we have enough condos or we have enough rental units. I mentioned segregation in my final slide. We have a very segregated community. It's not segregated by law anymore. It's segregated by zoning that produces economic segregation. And then it's so
How
what
does the EHO change that? Sacrifice the minority area. Please.
No. Okay, how does EHO change that? EHO applies to 75% of the residential land in Arlington. If EHO goes away, you have multi-million-dollar homes in those properties, okay? If EHO is in place, you have units that sell from between 500,000 to 1.7 million, according to one of the slides that was up. So who can afford a 500,000 to a 1.7 million dollar? So yes, perhaps those folks could find a unit in the corridor, the metro corridor, but that is not, okay, so getting back at the segregation question, the 75% of Arlington's community that doesn't have a space for those people, that land includes entire catchment areas for entire elementary schools. So you're gonna be telling, if you don't allow people of different means and of different housing types to live in that 75% of the land, then you're telling the teachers who teach the children in that elementary district that they don't belong in that elementary district. You're telling them that they have to go live somewhere else. Why is that fair? You need to be able to allow people of multiple types of means, multiple household types and needs to live in 75% of the land that is currently not feasible for them.
So Arlington today is about 58% white throughout the county. The areas that were rezoned by the county as part of this are about 70% white. When ASF took the county's financial numbers of projecting out what the sales price of these units were and charted that against Arlingtonians' income, the people who could afford to buy in these upzoned areas are the same percentage diversity-wise as the zones exist today. We can also look at Green Valley as one area that already allows EHO building types. You can build 2-family homes in Green Valley. And they've done the county's approved a number of those developments since 2000. In 2000, Green Valley was 61% Black and African American. In the 2020 census, that had fallen to 31% African American and Black. So that's one example of where the county should be looking at where we've done this before, where we do allow these more dense types. What has been the diversity impact? And it's certainly enough in the data there to be concerning.
I have a problem. I live in a neighborhood that has a sign that's on his property that says no, when it first went up, it said no duplexes here. Okay, I have talked to people who live in duplexes, who drive through my neighborhood, who have to explain to their children why they wouldn't be welcome in that neighborhood. Would you like to have to explain that to your children?
This is gonna be the last question. Okay. Ashley, you're right. I do owe you, I cannot read your writing.
No, but I may need it to assist me too, if I was privileged.
Hi, I'm Catherine Scruggs, and I actually served the 3 years on the Affordable Housing Master Plan Task Force. Now, this took place in 2010, maybe. It was adopted by the county in 2015. So this is not something that just came up in the last year or in the last 2 years. Maybe you didn't hear about it, but I worked on it and I know how much work the county did with it. I want to know, with all of the research and all the studies that were presented during those 3 years, what effect does that affordable housing master plan, which in addition to infrastructure, in addition to transportation, is one of the important parts of the comprehensive plan called for by the state of Virginia for every jurisdiction. So we needed to do this and we did it. I want to know, what is the effect of that affordable housing master plan on what's being talked about here tonight?
Good question. That is a really good question, and I'm glad you came tonight to say something. Housing affordability is something that Arlington has been wrestling with, for decades. Arlington has a really, really big part when it comes to affordable housing. I think everybody up here, I know Rennie and I have worked on cases producing affordable housing. We've probably produced thousands of affordable housing in Arlington County. I know Michelle has dedicated a big chunk of her professional life to advocacy for affordable housing. And it's a big problem. Our problem we're having is that the policies we've adopted haven't delivered. We're always falling further and further behind. And we keep doing the same things to try and keep up or to try and improve the situation. Missing middle, EHO, whatever you want to call it, will provide diversity in housing types in areas that were not diverse in housing types before. They were diverse. Those housing types existed in Arlington. They did not exist in the R districts before. Will that affect price? Will it make them affordable? Will make those products affordable? I don't believe it will. I think that those will continue to sell for what they're worth. Builders, God love them. They're providing the supply of what we need for our lives in Arlington, but they're a for-profit, and our nonprofit development services cannot keep up with our population growth and with the value of real property in Arlington. And it's a problem that has not been solved. I think we should look at it differently. One of our county board members made a very interesting suggestion, or provided a very good goal, possibly. That is at the organizational meeting on January 2nd. And putting to the test if Arlingtonians are really about affordable housing, whether or not that should be a burden that's shared by everybody generally, if that should be a general taxing question. Right now, affordable housing is financed by
Also, there are lots of sandwiches for back of the free. Take some home and snack later on. Thanks for coming.